Asian economies are grappling with fresh uncertainty after US President Donald Trump announced a flat 15% tariff on imports. It follows a Supreme Court ruling that struck down the president's sweeping Liberation Day tariffs, casting doubt over previously negotiated trade deals. US Trade Representative Jameson Greer has assured that existing agreements will remain in force. He says none of Washington's trade partners have indicated plans to withdraw. The new 15% levy is set to take effect tomorrow and will remain in place for at least 150 days. Now, China says it is assessing the impact and is urging the US to lift unilateral tariffs weeks ahead of Mr. Trump's planned visit to Beijing. A current trade truce has US duties on Chinese goods at 10%. South Korea says its trade deal with Washington remains valid, and it will continue consultations to maintain what it calls a balance of interests. Seoul is also monitoring possible refunds of the now voided tariffs. Meanwhile, India has reportedly delayed sending a delegation to Washington to finalise an interim trade pact, citing renewed uncertainty. New Delhi is assessing the implications of the US Supreme Court ruling on its bilateral deal. It would have cut US tariffs on Indian goods to 18% in exchange for India purchasing $500 billion worth of American products over 5 years. Now, businesses in Singapore are also looking for clarity after the latest twist in the US tariff saga. And to break down the impact of Trump's latest tariffs, I'm joined by Singapore Business Federation CEO Kok Ping Soon. And also joining us on Zoom tonight is UOB Head of Research, Suan Teck. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Now, I want to start with Ping Soon. You know, Asian economies now in limbo, including Singapore, of course. What are you hearing right now from businesses on the ground here in Singapore? Are they hitting the pause button at the moment, or are they pushing ahead and hoping to absorb the tariffs?
I think the answer is a bit of both. I think the problem and the main issue is not just the tariff level itself, but really the uncertainty about the scope, the timing, and really what comes next. And the problem is particularly acute, for companies, because they do have to make some planning in terms of where to supply and all that. And for those of companies who are actually having shipments that are en route, they're particularly hit. For companies that are reviewing their annual supply contracts, they are also hit. Clearly, companies who are thinking of making long-term investments are putting the pause button for now and seeing what will happen over the next few weeks.
Right. Now, Teck, I want to bring you into the conversation now. When we look at the 15% rate, do you think companies should treat this as the new baseline for Singapore, or is it still too early to call, given how fast the rules have been shifting so far?
Well, given the situation right now, I think companies should prepare to have these 15% as the baseline for them. If you look at the comments by DPM Gun over the weekend, clearly, I think right now, this 15% is likely to apply to Singapore despite the Singapore-US free trade agreement that is in place, which companies, if there are no exemptions, are subject to a 10% US tariff. So right now, we have to brace for the situation where the tariff will be higher at 15%. I think that's where I think companies should prepare themselves.
Yeah, and to add to the uncertainty, Teck, what do you think are the biggest unknowns right now that will really affect costs and planning? Are we talking about the scope of the products? Is it timing, exemptions? And we haven't even discussed the possible refunds at this point.
Right. I think the uncertainty is, of course, the scope of it. If you look at this is a global tariff, right? From a US perspective, that means all the products for all these countries selling to the US will be subject to that rate. So the scope itself, right now, I think we should consider that to cover all products coming in, except those, for example, semiconductor products or pharmaceuticals. Singapore has negotiated with the US. And also semiconductors tariffs right now are being put on hold. But the uncertainty, of course, is that within the next 150 days, where the current Section 122 15% tariff will be in place for the next 150 days, during this period, what else is going to come out? So I think companies, again, would have to prepare for more changes on the tariff front, unfortunately, that's where uncertainty is, like what Ping Soon mentioned just now.
Now, Ping Soon, let's get your take on this. Which industries do you think are most exposed to this tariff churn here? Do you think it's the manufacturers, logistics, SMEs, MNCs? What are we looking at here?
I think the implications will be across the whole ecosystem. But I just wanted to add on to that point that, clearly that 15% should not be seen as the potentially just the maximum. The reality, indeed, is that the Section 232, on pharmaceutical and semiconductors is still not finalized. So don't take that 15% may well be the endpoint as far as maximum is concerned. A lot of uncertainty out there. So if you ask about who are being affected, clearly those exporters who are manufacturing goods, clearly in the electronics and the broader manufacturing to the US, they are the one that's going to be affected most. But beyond that, the next level will be the wholesale traders as well as logistic firms. There'll be rerouting, invoicing that has to be redone. And then the next tier will be the SMEs that are being integrated and supplying to these MNCs. They will be impacted. So I would say that the impact cuts across the entire ecosystem of players.
Yeah, and even when we've considered already the pharmaceuticals and semiconductors as key exports, even if they're treated differently or some products are exempt, where do you think the pressure will be most felt when it comes to investment decisions going forward?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that pharmaceutical and semiconductors account for about 40% of total non-oil domestic exports to the US. And already, if you look at last year's data, right, when the tariff rate is at 10%, our year-on-year growth of exports to US declined by 9%. So now it's 15%. So you're going to see that filter through the rest of the economy. But for pharmaceutical and semiconductor, what we worry about is that because of this keep changing of tariff rates, investment decision on when is the next fab, do I increase capacity? Do I move to the next location? All these investment decisions are now being put on hold.
Yeah, well, Teck, last year, we know that Singapore's overall hit, that looked more contained than we had feared. What do you think cushioned the blow for Singapore? Is it that we had diversified markets, that we also did a routing of supply chain? What did we get right?
So I think last year what happened was that after the announcement on the Liberation Day on the 2nd April, and there was quite a big round of, I think, concerns and panic as well as to how we are going to overcome that. But fortunately, I think throughout the year, soon after the Liberation Day announcement, the US government actually announced a pause in the tariff, and we had a global baseline base rate. As a result, a lot of these front-loading of exports was happening. So that helped, I think, stabilize, production and exports. And the other thing, of course, is that AI investment has been very strong, had been very strong last year. So that also helped for example, our electronic sector, semiconductor production. So that cushioned some of these impact from the initial shock of this Trump tariff. So that I think these are two factors that help to cushion the companies, I think, production and also exports plans.
Well, Ping Soon, what's your feel on the ground right now? Do you think companies are already moving? They're starting to reroute their supply chains or even shifting their end markets now? Or is it still in a contingency planning kind of stage because they're waiting to see what's happening?
I think you could look at companies' response in 3 tiers. I think the first tier, as you say, are the contingency planning, looking at the tariff rates and what they can do to see what they can make changes in the contract. Most companies for contingency planning have been there, done that, because this thing took place last year, right? What we are seeing most companies do are the tier 2 responses, which to make some of the more reversible operational decisions in terms of rerouting, in terms of building up more inventories, and perhaps testing whether they can sell into ASEAN or EU. Now, the tier 3 of responses, which is really strategic resupply as well as making new investment, I think that one is still not happening and it's very selective. The problem for most businesses is that, although Trump operates on a pretty short cycle when it comes to tariff rates, business take a longer cycle and longer term decisions, and that is a much longer term cycle for companies to come to those decisions.
Ping Soon, Teck, thank you so much for both of you sharing your insights with us. I've been chatting so far with the CEO of SBF, Kok Ping Soon, and also the Head of Research at UOB, Suan, Teck.